colorful, and it's been fascinating digging into the world of lampworking and especially the scientific making. So I've been looking at like histories that tie all of the things together that are kind of a holistic view of it. So I come out of the studio glass movement. So for people who don't have a background in glass or at least the artistic side of it, the studio glass movement is what you would call all of the hot glass blowers predominantly, working in the style developed at this school in '62. It's like the first workshop leading to the first collegiate glass program, teaching hot glass in colleges all over the place. So it started here, and then I would say now there's probably 60 schools that have hot glass programs, and a good 20 or 30 that have graduate programs in glass making. So along with that, they have we have a strong myth as to the origins of everything. So it's interesting when we start comparing those origin stories to other fields that are related to something. So just to kind of give you a view of what I've seen to be sort of this dominant history within the art glass world. Glass blowers like to talk about how glass blowing glass shaping has been going on for a long time, but around 100 AD is a big turning point because that's when glass was blown. So you have a hollow tube and air is inserted to make a bubble, and that's a turning point because it burns what we do. And many of the techniques, aside from equipment and techniques, aside from fuel source, have been very similar throughout time from that 180 time. We look a lot to the Venetians, which have a continuous history on the island of Murano since 1292, when all the glass blowers were kicked out of Venice onto this small island as to not burn the city down. And it was all very, very secretive because no one was allowed to leave Murano. It's a major trade hub, right? So they wanted glass to leave, but not ideas to leave. And then looking at the Americas, so the first settlement that came over had Germans that came and set up the first industry in America, which was glass blowing. They thought that there's tons of resources here, aka sand on the beach and forest to burn. So they set up a glass house. So from this, there's a lot of German-style objects early on in the Americas, as far as like style of blowing. And then from that factory background, we have Harvey Littleton and Dominic Labino. That's a bit sarcastic. But so Harvey was a professor here of ceramics, and he was interested, along with a group of other people, but he's sort of seen as the grandfather of putting together a workshop and then a permanent class here. Dominic Labino was his friend who was an engineer, holds a lot of really interesting patents on glass making, including a lot of things meant for industry, as in fiberglass glass compositions and fiberglass production techniques. But he helped to make this garage-size studio to scale down what was happening in a factory to make it available to individual artists.
I love that image because it says so much about the nature of the installations.
Yeah. Yeah, and as far as I know, this is on campus, this photo. So, yeah, it's pretty fascinating. And the types of people that he brought in here, and the furnaces used, massive legacy. So the work that he made was things like this, bright and colorful, and him and Dominic made exceptionally similar work. And it's all about like making the glass look glassy, do what it wants to do, be bright colors, and be flopped over to the side, you know, behave a certain way. Some other people that I think are just like the epitome of what the early studio glass movement was Dick Marcus. He's like my favorite. So lots of bright colors and wonk. And then Erwin Eich, he is a German. So he does things with blow molds. He comes from a family that owned a glass factory in Fraunau. I think that's maybe how it's said. But he's one of the people that Harvey brought in here. So if you all want to take a look at Harvey's book, which we have back there, there's a really interesting explanation of how he brought glass recipes with him from Germany, and they tried to melt it, and it was a total failure because their furnaces were not capable of melting. Similar problem. That's what I've had this week. So back to this this timeline. I get it's pretty accepted that this is the first collegiate program for glass, and the first time that women were taught glassworking techniques. At least that's how the myth goes. And then all other college programs are traced back to this. Another thing happening at the same time was a lot of excitement about Italian glass. And then we have Lino Telepietro, people say being the first Italian to come over and teach glass techniques, which I guess the other story is that his cousin is somewhere in that family come over and teach these Italian techniques that had never left this island, but were now being introduced into our other separate style of glassmaking. And then, you know, leads to people like this, which everyone knows. Not to diminish what they do, but this is like what people point to when they think of studio glass. Bright and floppy. And then another thing that really interests me is this genealogy of how things are learned. So I learned from Shay Rhodes, who learned from Steve Powell, who I never got a good answer of who he learned from, but somebody at Louisiana State University who learned from Harvey. So I think everybody can kind of trace, anybody working in the hot glass world can trace their lineage back in that way. But that leaves this lineage stopping at 1960 because it's sort of a wall where things like that are picked up. But I guess the question I have is, what about lamp workers that are working in this artistic field? And where do they come from with technique and imagery and their ideas? Because that's not what is taught in these collegiate programs. And then where does the aesthetics and technique come from for the pipe making work, which is exploding and massive right now? Whether you like it or not, it's making things that go out into the world.
He's on the lower right. Yeah, is that the one that was just recently auctioned off?
Yeah, $110,000. And this marble went into space. So.
Just say it. Just say it.
Yeah,
Is it that no collegiate programs have that kind of
No. I mean, I think there are some classes, but I think that there are introductory classes. And I think that academically it's taught the same way as the hot shop, where, I mean, that's a whole other thing. Teaching a conceptual approach to craft making. But I don't think that any art programs solely have lamp working that I know of. It's just a supplement to the hot shop. But I could be wrong. So the other myth that I have been looking at and super interested in. So if we're looking at lampworking as the major influence, types of lampworking have been going on for a long, long time. So this is, I put a lot of information like this image from Nicholson's history of lampworking, which is pretty fascinating. But I think it had it in one of the books.
Chinese or Japanese? Japanese. 1732.
You see from that image that might be like a pretty loose interpretation of what lampworking is. Over a small concentrated area versus reaching into a furnace. I think there's some funny lines to it all. But before glass blowing came about, there were a lot of other processes that were very similar to lampworking techniques as far as production. And I think Catherine and Tracy can talk a lot about the chemical side of things, and you as well, but the historic side of what was brought into the world. But some of the things that I found pretty interesting is there's tons of imagery, especially French imagery of women as bead makers and small object makers at the lamp, and it being a woman's job to have. That there were more women than men making objects this way. So I found that pretty interesting.
This was Italian?
Oh, I apologize. The image would be French.
French,
There were
okay.
French bead makers.
Is that from one of those encyclopedias?
I believe this one is. And then I have some pages we can look at as
And
well.
that's where you modeled your spirit.
Yeah, so yeah, it's of that same era, and I'm not really sure what the benefit is of this kind of peanut
I'm
shape.
also very interested to confirm, looking at those documents, to
Yeah.
confirm with you that is flame working.
So I've read opinions, and maybe not necessarily these, but I know some that were similar with complicated stems and such. I've heard it said that objects were made and stock was made while the furnace was hot, and then while the furnace was down, people would switch over to small construction to assemble things. So.
Because that's exactly the kind of work that first became scientific glass blowers. That's what they started out doing.
Yeah, and so that's what's really fascinating is the crossover. It's the same skills that will bounce in between that sort of making. Again, I don't know if these specific ones, but decorative from this era. And we're talking 1700s, late 16s, mid 17s.
Sometimes if you can look at the object very closely in person, you can kind of do kind of a forensic analysis of what was the heat, where was heat applied, what was melted versus what was stuck together, because it was soft, what was melted together in place, and then try to recreate the process that was necessary to produce those sorts of seals, to make sense of what was done and heated in a glory hole versus what was heated at a torch and stuck together. But you really have to be able to look at it up very close.
You need the individual
You
object.
actually need the object in
to
hand.
make that
Correct.
secure.
Yes.
So one of the things I'm hoping we can do today is we have a nice polariscope, and maybe we can get some photography of some objects that we assemble that can be used as concrete examples of what we would expect to see. And maybe down the road, those photographs can be used to confirm in the way that you're talking about. And then looking at the Americas, these are just some examples of Venetian scientific ware. and it's a Nevers figure, a French lampwork figure from the early 1800s.
How big?
Oh, they're tiny,
Oh.
super tiny. But that would be a soft glass thing. So like at the Corning Museum, for those of you who don't have glass experience, it's like the glass museum, largest glass collection in the world with a massive library. They have some of these where, this is a single figure, but they would have these traveling shrines that are maybe 12 to 18 inches tall, and they would be made up of thousands of tiny lampwork components that would set this like religious scene. Kind of fascinating. But all of the work going on with working in France and Germany were migrated over here. So I think that if we look at some examples, we can see some pretty strong connections as far as aesthetic influence from these different time periods, like these figures. We can take a look at some more of those if you'd like. And then looking at, like, this is, I think, obviously Venetian style of construction, even without knowing its source. So I think it's kind of interesting how some of the hot shop aesthetic of construction transferred into the lampworking world, as far as like the bulbs and the feet and everything. And we can bring up some larger pictures of that stuff as well. And then one of the things that I'm so in love with is traveling lampworkers of the late 18s, early 1900s. So these are people that would have lampworking skills, usually passed down in some sort of family way, and they would be in troops and would travel around the United States. I think this was also going on in other countries as well. There's Corning has some interesting broadsides of advertisements from Russia and definitely from the UK, of people traveling around using glass in a performative way. So I'm really fascinated with this because there's a lot of performative craft and performative glass going on in the art world right now. And this is a very, very early precursor to this. So, yeah, but
Would they be kind of itinerant and
Yes.
on their own, or would they be affiliated with a? I know,
So-
like now, I remember in the 60s they called it carnival glass, right? And would
Yeah.
show up with the circus.
right. So there's multiple things. So like this, the Waldrons, they would they had a family that would travel around. And so I think that sometimes they would travel like with a circus or something, but there are stories of a lot of these people going to a town and renting out a storefront that happened to be empty, or setting up just for a weekend and making these objects. And there are accounts of places where you pay 2 cents to get in, and you would be given like a door prize on the way out or something, which might just be like pulled thread or something that's not that exciting. But the point is that you are paying to watch them do this magic, and not for an object necessarily. Although probably in their minds it was all in the service of selling their wares. But that's not necessarily the total impact of all of it. So that's what I'm fascinated with. Lots of women, and some of the troops were led by women, which I say that because it's in conflict to what the popular hot glass notion is. But just because I found this sweet little video, this newsreel, I think this is from 3 generations of glassmakers. This is at the time the oldest glass blower. So, see, they have hundreds of things laid out on the table. They've got the flames. They're doing like these cellophane things. They're not making things. They're making excitement. So this is an example of someone spinning thread with a flame. So this is something that I'd like to get people's opinions on how this was done, because I haven't seen it done in person. But then they would use these threads to make these little decorative things. You see they're all going at once, and it's not really a production house. Touches it. Anyway, there's not a ton of information out there on these people, but there were tons of these people, and also as far as how they would associate themselves. There in the magazine I have back there, there's a really good account of this author from the 1880s going to the American Museum in New York City, which was operated by Barnum of the circus fame, and it was sort of like a lot of sideshows put together into a permanent housing in New York City, and they had a staff glass blower that would do things like this. So the guy writing about it was saying like, well, of course everyone living in New York has seen this glass blower doing this performance thing. It was just sort of like, of course this is happening. Another awesome example from the 50s, just the performative nature of it.
We gonna try that today?
Put cicada in a bubble. But so make note of like the materials he's using there. He's got the crossfire torch that's identical to what we're going to be using, neon lab. We have some other good examples of that happening. And then, as far as modern performance kind of things go, the bottom there, that's the Burnt Asphalt family. And so they travel around to different hot shops, and they do like a kind of cooking show, right? Where they're cooking food. Do you know what they're doing there?
This right here, that's a marshmallow tower that they're burning. They're roasting marshmallows.
But they'll do things like blow a big cylinder and slide it over a chicken to roast the chicken.
And then they hand it all out to the crowd so everybody can have a taste of like what they've eaten. It's like made. Yeah.
And the object doesn't matter so much. The object is remnants of the action and the magic of it. So I guess another thing, Brett Swinson at the Chrysler Museum. The Chrysler Museum has an initiative to do a lot of performative glassworking. That's where Heather and I met at. And so monthly they do a performance night where people come in and watch, and there's rarely an object at the end of it, but there's a ton of excitement. Everybody has a really, really good time.
These two events were the opening, and it was an entire week of probably 4 to 5 performances going on every single day.
Yeah. So in this one, these are big panes of tempered glass, and they had people stand behind the tempered glass and hit dead center with a torch until the whole thing spidered out. You can see it. Watch the behavior of it. And then because Tracy was interested, you were asking if there was a video. This is
Only captured by a woman sitting in the audience of Craft Bowling, because Chris Kelly never actually put a video of this work.
You're right. But nevertheless, it exists on the internet. So this isn't lamp working, but this is a glass furnace on a boat.
That's so awesome.
But so hot glass people also do have this fascination with itinerant work, traveling around, and there's a ton of people that have mobile glass studios, and then this qualifies as mobile.
I was about to say, that's pretty mobile.
I wonder if you could even walk around with a backpack on your back.
That's my question for you.
Is that possible?
Let's do it. I've got it in my room. So we can set it up and play with it if you don't like. So that's fun. Oh, come on.
As the truth of performing in the glass.
Okay, a few more things. So there was when the studio glass movement came along, there was a lot of excitement because it's big and hot and sexy, and people would invite others to watch in the studio and see how exciting it was. And it's my opinion that a lot of that excitement and people's understanding of it as this performative action of making comes from this history of glass blowers working at circuses and fairs. So I think it was very much primed by this lamp working culture that's now disappeared and not looked at very closely. Let's see what this video was. Another newsreel. Oh, right. Another exciting performative thing from the same time period. But you can't talk about the performative work in lamp working without looking at the steam engines. So there were several troops that had these steam engines assembled. So this is the only video I've ever seen of one in action, other than modern ones made by a guy named Bandu. But pretty fascinating stuff. And how couldn't you like look at that and be in love with the magic of the material? And then, just to discount one other thing with the hot glass world, according to Gianni Toso, the lamp worker who works with soft glass, he also does hot shop work, but he claims to have come to America and taught Italian glass working, but in the form of lamp working, like 7 years before Lino ever set foot in the country. But I think if we look at this broader view that includes lamp working, side by side with the hot glass world, we get a better explanation of like women working in glass, certainly performance in glass, and then how things are interrelated, like the scientific glass making, and how it borders on with the artistic making, as well as like neon, which is something that is a definite hybrid between those worlds, and what the setup was, and the aesthetic influences and technical influences given to the pipe making world, despite many not knowing or acknowledging too much about this background and why things are made the way they are. So that's my spiel on that.